Hello. Hi. A warm welcome to you all on this snowy April evening. My name is Solveig Øvstebø and I am the director of the Astrup Fearnley-museet, and I have the pleasure of working with Leonard Rickhard as the curator of his exhibition Between Construction and Collapse. This show provides a rare opportunity to experience the full breadth of Rickhard's extraordinary work. He was truly one of our foremost artists. In connection with the exhibition, we have organized a series of lectures and events to emphasize different aspects of Leonard Rickhard's practice, and today's lecture by architect Kjetil Trædal Thorsen is an event we have been looking forward to for months. Leonard Rickhard was meticulously preoccupied with the notion of space. Space in a broad sense of it. Physical space, psychological space, both within his paintings, lines, perspectives, illusion, depth, and flatness, but also when it came to the actual architectural space in which his paintings were placed. Through his whole career, Rickhard maintained the idea of the exhibition being the place where a work found completion, taking full advantage of the architectural properties of an exhibition space. Over the course of these 3 years we had working on this show, Leonard and I discussed over and over again where the best placements of walls could be, how we could make use of the existing architecture, the angles, the different viewpoints. Each gallery is conceived according to several motifs or themes. This room addressed the aspects of spatial construction quite directly. As you can see, his attentiveness to space also extended beyond the canvas to include the work's frame, so that the painting become objects that we experience physically in the room. As my colleagues and I were planning lectures connected to this exhibition, it was obvious that we had to dig deeper into this aspect of space in Leonard Rickhard's practice. And who could better help us to do so than Kjetil Trædal Thorsen, the co-founder of Snøhetta and one of the leading practitioners and thinkers on architectural practice and philosophy globally. Thank you so much, Kjetil, for accepting this invitation. We are truly excited, incredibly honored to have you here. I leave the podium to you.
Thank you, Solveig. that didn't make me feel much easier. Look, it was actually a surprise to get invited to talk about Leonard Rickhard and about this particular exhibition. Because I'm in no way a specialist on his work. Neither am I an art historian. To put his work into context, my knowledge is really quite limited. Only twice I met Leo, and both times in connection with the Anders Jahr Cultural Prize, which he received in 2015. His wonderful speech is still standing very strong during the prize ceremony that evening. But still, he was somehow reluctant during the short conversations we had. I understand he was reluctant in many other cases as well, especially when it came to exhibitions and showing his work abroad. His reluctance felt quite real to me. And when I wanted to find out more about him and his art, he held back. However, his curiousness and interest in me and Snøhetta's architecture was extraordinarily pertinent. Quite the opposite of his responses about himself and his own work. So in lack of this personal experience, I was left with some very few choices for how to deal with this evening's session. I could read about Leonard Rickhard in publications, printed and online, and I could try to interpret the information I got in this way. I could talk to people who knew him, had studied him and his work, and had contemplated on its content. Of course, I did both, but little of this information has found its way into this particular talk. To make life easier for myself, I could have shown pictures to make my points visual as well as verbal. But I started feeling it being an intrusion to this space, to show any other pictures in this room other than those already present. So finally, I decided to let this evening's address become a free flow of associations across fields and experiences. What are the sources of inspiration in our own lives? And what, if not life captured in art, can trigger our imagination? I wanted strongly to find a personal angle to his work and to be intuitively triggered by what I saw. Probably, I was invited also because I am an architect. And many have made comparisons between Leo's work and architectural engineering and technical drawings and its related media. Be it as paintings or as drawings of factory miniatures, on tables, models, rooms, objects, landscapes, and machines. The archetypes represented in these paintings are not challenging or new designs, but they're rather memories and reflections on buildings and structures connected to specific functions and human behavior. Some paintings discuss scale by deviating from the normal one-to-one representation of objects. The factory models that we saw in the entering room on a table make these objects seem to be on their way in planning. But yet, the models indicate that these objects could also be created in real size, one-to-one. At Snøhetta, we have tested various expressions of three-dimensional renderings for architectural projects. The super realistic pictures possible today do not really show how unresolved and underdeveloped a project might be. They are normally premature representations of something to become, instead of super realistic renderings. We sometimes render our projects to look like models of the project. We have even placed three-dimensional model renderings on realistic rendered tables. This is to create a certain distance of the 3D expression of something that is seemingly finished, but actually only on its way. When asked by the magazine Architecture to comment on this little talk tonight, I even dared to say that the people shown in Leo's work remind me of architects. Unprecise and unrealistic in their own appearance, set within the precise environments of their own creation. Now, funnily enough, I feel a little like that myself. Yet, these observations above are maybe too literal, at least to me. Since the first time I was confronted with the art of Leonard Rickhard, I felt there is a more complex layering to the body, his body of the work, or to his body of work. It was as if one artwork could not live without the other. That they were self-referencing themselves in the way they were looking at each other, and I could not understand damn shit. So I needed help from a third platform beyond the visual and architectural platforms already existing in the room. Now, if at first hand I assume that architecture is the art of creating spaces and physical surroundings for things that have not yet happened, and if visual art depicts moments, I could further assume that the relationship between visual art and architecture can never ever be indifferent. So what could this in-between relationship contain? Could it be music? I was surprised that it was a book, a fiction, that would save me and take my mind through this exhibition once I was in the room, step by step. The first time I read the novel The Third Policeman by the Irish author Flann O'Brien, I was left in a sort of uneasy vacuum. And, funnily enough, this fiction was the first thing that popped up in my mind seeing this exhibition. I couldn't help it. I'm still uncertain why, but some far-fetched parallels appeared in my head. They led me to believe I could use this book as a crutch when moving through the unknown territory of Leonard Rickhard's work. So the novel actually became my context. I don't know if Leo ever read The Third Policeman, and I don't think it's important if he did or not. It was more important to me to survey my associative link between Leonard Rickhard's art and this novel. In my mind, to get really inspired is to connect seemingly unrelated life-bending issues into new constellations. At least, this is how I see inspired architecture arise. When walking through this exhibition and seeing it, I recognized the feeling of uneasiness, similar to the one I had when I read the book. Something disturbing, not unlike being stuck in a staircase and not being able to move up or down. As with The Third Policeman, I felt something was deliberately hidden from me. False evidence, misleading hints in the paintings seemed to off-rail my reading of content and messages. Even the beautiful colors seemed to be camouflaging some bad events that could have happened just before or would happen just after that captured moment. Is it, or is the beauty in the paintings, of the paintings, a cover-up? One could ask. Written between 1939 and 1940, The Third Policeman stayed unpublished until 1967, and that was the year after the death of the author. This strange novel is a dark story about a probable crime of robbery and a brutal murder committed by the narrator of this fiction. And quite early in the book, the narrator himself breaks his leg. And for some unknown reason, the broken leg does not get a splint and is being repaired, but it's cut off and replaced by a wooden leg. The limb was stored elsewhere. In my mind, cutting off this limb in the book is not an act of deconstruction, but rather an incision with the intention to replace the leg with something else. Although a first impression of motifs in many of the paintings surrounding us point in direction of deconstruction, I have not been able to find any deconstructed elements in Rickhard's work. Only incisions, or objects not yet assembled, or objects never to be assembled. Further, in this flow of associations, the narrator of this particular story describes a two-dimensional police station looking like a traditional Irish house. There are only 2 police officers in this two-dimensional building, and they are mainly preoccupied with bicycles. I'll get back to the bicycles a little bit later. But beneath this two-dimensional police station, there is a huge underground compartment where time stops. From the book, it is enough to say we arrived after walking at least a mile of plate into a well-lit, airy hall, which was completely circular and filled with indescribable articles very like machinery, but not quite as intricate as the more difficult machines. Large, expensive-looking cabinets of these articles were placed tastefully about the floor, while the circular wall was one mass of these inventions with little dials and meters placed plentiful here and there. Hundreds of miles of coarse wire were visible running everywhere except about the floor. Now, this two-dimensionality above ground is very interesting, as is the three-dimensionality of underground spaces. And they seem so obvious and such a clear choice in depicting exactly this relationship. Layers of strata expose the density of the ground. And remember, facades are in character, two-dimensional drawings, whereas basements are carved out of the ground and surrounded by earth. So basements have no external facades. And they can only exist as three-dimensional spaces, never, ever as objects. Both the cutting and the section of the ground and the above-ground facade are related very strongly to architectural facade drawings, where the drawing at a certain point will have to cut into the ground, revealing earth geology, strata, and underground spaces outside of the limitation of the facade surface itself. My own imagery of this verbal description in The Third Policeman was revealed in so many paintings by Leonard Rickhard. Just look at the machines, look at the wirings, look at the earth, look at the cuts, look at the sections. The Third Policeman, as a book, also describes a second police station where a third policeman is located. This station is secretly located within the wall of the alleged victims of the crime's house. In fact, strangely enough, the policeman actually does have the face of the victim. Between the outer and inner surface of a wall is normally where insulation, infrastructure, and structure are found. In Rickhard's work, similar structures in this no space can be seen as sort of X-rays exposing seemingly important infrastructure. Seemingly important infrastructure. Machinery or miniature spaces inside walls of buildings portrayed through X-raying. Again, I cannot help myself comparing some content exactly in these paintings with architectural drawings and representations, because architectural drawings are explanations to others how something is put together. Often details that will never be seen after completion. Foundations, structure, wiring, piping. Remember that a user of architecture, and most of you are, we are here, you will only be exposed to the outermost surface, describing the building as an object, or to the innermost surfaces, limiting the interior space. Architectural drawings, however, make the invisible visible. Annotations, markings, and symbols are intended to explain even more precisely what you see. They are explanational texts for you to be able to translate what you see into real life. And by using architectural methods of representations in drawings and in paintings, it's my opinion that Leonard Rickhard manages to make us believe there is a particular sense in the picture. As if there is a procedure of getting from A to B to C, and that it could actually happen in a different world. But at the same time, the annotations, legends, and symbols he's using are absurd. They don't connect. And the viewer, again, feels pleasantly misguided. Maybe he had his own language, but I don't know. Maybe it made sense to him in a very particular way, but he's never, ever revealed it. Spaces inside of walls, the in-between, could very easily be described as liminal spaces or thresholding spaces in architecture. These spaces of uncertain transition between where you have been and where you are going normally would trigger wild ideas of opposites. They expose you directly to opposites, inside, outside, down, up. In this sense, I cannot help seeing all of Rickhard's spaces as liminal. They're all transitional spaces, thus again making us feel a way unsettled. There are sort of mysteries and deceiving stories told in the sense of precision. My sister, Kari, the anthropologist, she guided me in the direction of the term betwixt and between. And it was used by Victor Turner, another anthropologist, to describe the liminal stages of rites, when you perform rites, where the actual person performing the ritual is removed and secluded from the rest of society while performing this rite. In this particular case, that person becomes invisible, so to speak. He has no name, owns no property, has no rank. When the narrator in The Third Policeman gets arrested for the crime he is supposed to have committed, he claims he cannot be sentenced and hung because he doesn't have a name, he's only the narrator. And since he doesn't have a name, he cannot be a person. The two policemen disagree, and they claim since he's not a person, he might as well hang. The narrator, however, escapes this hanging because there are some disturbing and absurd numbers coming out of the underground chambers. And this is the basement that was described earlier, under the police station. This disturbing amount of numbers coming from the underground bring these policemen into a state of panic, and they let the narrator escape. To me, not only being architects, the persons and the people in Rickhard's paintings, but they are nameless, like the narrator. I don't see recognitions in this particular sense. But there is something more to these people. And I find it interesting how they are located in spaces, either symmetrically as if they had placed themselves there, and not the painter. And another thing related to this is that the model builders in the model plane pictures are only seemingly making model planes. The different model parts are spread on the tables in the different paintings in frozen moments. And we know for sure that these models will never be finished. And there's one more layer. The relationship between the policemen and their bicycles, as mentioned before, is a strange one. And in the book, there are increasingly longer footnotes. And on some pages, the footnotes are longer than the actual novel. And in these footnotes, there is a reference to a certain Dr. de Selby. He is an absolutely controversial scientist and philosopher, having outrageous theories about most things in life. One example is his mirror theory. As a fact, when you look in the mirror, you see a slightly younger version of yourself. This is true because you have the speed of light distance between you and the mirror. The false conclusion deriving from this particular fact is that then, if you place endless numbers of mirrors, practically impossible, according to Dr. de Selby, because of the curvature of the Earth, you would see yourself as a child. Another one of these theories which impacts us directly throughout the understanding of value of absurdity is what he calls the atomic theory. It claims that atoms are exchanged and absorbed between users of bicycles and the bicycles themselves. The more you use a bicycle, the more bicycle you become. And in turn, the more human the bicycle becomes. I cannot help but to picture the transfer of paint from a brush or pencil held by an arm onto a canvas or a piece of paper. The more the painter paints, the more he becomes his painting. And the more the paintings becomes him. This infectious relationship between painter and painting is real. But in Leo's paintings, there's yet another layer of adaptation depicted in relationship to the model builders, which is dealing with the same topic. The chopped off head or arm in some of these pictures, they're not bloody or brutal depictions. Rather, they assemble the airplane model parts on the table. Has the model builder he describes through the painting been dissected into model parts not yet reassembled? Has the model builder, by building models, himself become an unfinished model? Do we become what we make? Architects definitely do. So by now, you should have seen and heard how I'm struggling with all these layers of partialism and absurd information. They are really endless. There are so many cross-references, so many things cross-referencing each other as if they were parts of an endless story. So my question would be, looking at paintings and this exhibition, do we need to formulate and interpret it all for ourselves? Or is it enough to inhale the art as we would with air? We need to breathe to live, but we do not need to reflect on every breath we take. For inspirational reasons, however, it might make sense to associate and imagine meanings in art, and especially these works. It can help us move forward. We can discuss content. Because here the stories are embedded in the layers of meaning within the work of art itself. Whereas the image portraying that depth is purely portrayed as a surface, in the surface itself. The third policeman is, by many, categorized as a modernist metafiction. It is full of absurd conclusions based on reality-based observations. And in classical metafictional manner, the story is a tool to undermine literary conventions and to explore the relationship between literature, reality, life, and art. It is a protest. It is a statement described through a metafictional story. One could have probably, if one needed to, describe Leo's work as metafictional. But one very important side of his artistic work prevents me from doing so. His one-to-one planning, almost like an architect would, of his exhibitions and his precise involvement in curating them leads me to believe that he's more reality-based than so. The location of each artwork, if you have the opportunity to walk the exhibition, if you haven't already done so, the sequencing, the lighting, the distance, the scale, and wall and floor mounting makes the impression that he also sees his paintings and drawings as artifacts in a spatial relationship to that particular context. It seems to be, as you already said, the works seem not to be completed until they're mounted in this context. So, suddenly the artwork steps into reality by being both objects and paintings at the same time. I think, to a large extent, this might be the reason why this exhibition is one of the best exhibitions of paintings I've ever seen in this museum. It responds to the architecture, not necessarily by fighting it, but rather by bending the space into the art. So maybe it's not one of the best, maybe it is the best. But this feeling of uneasiness has not left me. It's been tickled by the fact that the work of Leo is not yet unraveled. It could be the intention that it never should be. Maybe he intended to hide certain messages for us, and for one particular reason, for us to be continuously actively looking for these messages. that would generate activity in our own bodies and our own minds for things that we know we couldn't find, we wouldn't know, but our curiosity would never, ever end. And I think all of these pictures have this hidden within them. The Monday after the attack on the satirical Charlie Hebdo magazine, Snøhetta won the competition for the new headquarters of the Le Monde newspaper building in Paris. The surviving staff of this magazine moved into the existing offices of Le Monde on the same day. We suggested to clad all the facades of this new building with a series of smaller rectangular glass elements of different color and texture. What Le Monde and all the employees there did not know, but what they know now, is that the pattern of this glass, of the elements creating these four-sided facades, derived from a pixelation of a newspaper article in Le Monde about the attack itself. Now, it's completely impossible to read the article or the text from the facade, of course. The text is hidden in the pixelation. And through the algorithms that we created at the time, it's not possible to reverse this process. So, this text can never ever be deciphered by anyone of the facade in the future. Now you think I am crazy, but architecture is, as I said at the beginning, about planning spaces and physical surroundings for things that have not yet happened. That means that you can only imagine what kind of things will be interpreted by people in these spaces. Similarly, I find these paintings to trigger me in direction of looking at things in myself as an architect when thinking about happenings that I have no idea about. So I am truly inspired to continue to hide elements for future engagement without any type of results in architecture. I think it truly triggers curiosity. Is it absurd? Yes. Is it meaningful? I think so. So at the end of this, we can have a conversation afterwards, I will end with a short note from Dr. de Selby, this crazy scientist from the Third Policeman. The existence of eternity, which in his mind turned out to be just down the road, proves the world is not round, but shaped like a sausage. Now, thank you very much for the invitation.